The crack of lightning split the dark sky as Madeline Zane clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching helplessly as the raging tornado tore the roof clean off her newly built homestead. A cold April rain began to fall as the twister disappeared across the Oklahoma plains, leaving destruction in its wake, and her dreams scattered to the winds. "No, no, no," she whispered, her knees sinking into the mud as she stared at the exposed interior of what had been her pride and joy just minutes before, a small but sturdy cabin that represented every penny she had to her name. It was 1878, 3 years since she'd left Pennsylvania with dreams of independence and a teaching position that had disappeared upon her arrival in Clearwater Springs. At 24, Madeline had been too stubborn to return east, instead using her savings to claim a small plot of land under the Homestead Act. Now, as rain soaked through her dress, she wondered if the letter from her sister begging her to come home had been right all along. The sound of hoofbeats approached from the road, barely audible over the diminishing storm. Madeline pushed her soaked auburn hair from her face as a tall figure on horseback emerged from the darkness. "Miss Zane," called a deep voice she recognized. "Thought I might find you out here in this mess." Dane Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, his long frame casting a shadow as he approached. The local rancher had always made Madeline nervous with his quiet intensity and reputation as one of the toughest cowboys in the territory. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged, struggling to maintain composure as she gestured to the ruin of her home. "As you can see, I'm dealing with a bit of trouble." He surveyed the damage, rainwater running in rivulets from the brim of his hat. "That's more than a bit, I'd say. The whole roof's gone." "Thank you for that assessment," she replied sharply, immediately regretting her tone. "I'm sorry. It's been a difficult evening." Dane's expression softened as he removed his duster and draped it around her shoulders. "No need for apologies. Let's get you someplace dry and we'll sort this out." "There is no dry place," Madeline said, her voice cracking. "Everything I own is in there, getting soaked by the minute." Dane looked up at the sky where stars had begun to appear through breaks in the clouds as the storm moved east. His face, illuminated by the emerging moonlight, held a thoughtfulness that caught Madeline off guard. "The tornado took your roof away," the cowboy said with surprising gentleness, "but we'll sleep under the stars instead." He gestured toward the clearing near her cabin. "We can salvage what we can, set up a proper camp, and figure the rest out at first light." "We?" Madeline questioned, raising an eyebrow. "Can't leave a neighbor in trouble," he replied simply, already walking toward her ruined cabin. "Besides, I've got supplies on my horse, and I reckon between the two of us, we can make something work until morning." Madeline felt a flicker of hope replace the despair that had been settling in her chest. She followed him, watching as he efficiently assessed what could be saved. Within an hour, Dane had constructed a makeshift shelter using her undamaged furniture, canvas from her supplies, and rope from his saddlebag. He built a fire nearby, its warmth slowly drying their wet clothes as they sat across from each other. "Why were you out this way, Mr. Xavier?" Madeline asked, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "Dane, please," he corrected. "I was checking fence lines when I saw the twister. Figured I should ride through and make sure folks were all right." He paused, studying her over the rim of his cup. "Truth is, I was worried about you out here alone." "I've been alone for 3 years," she said defensively. "I managed just fine." "Never said you didn't," Dane replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Being capable and being alone don't have to go hand in hand, though." The fire crackled between them as Madeline considered his words. She'd been so determined to prove her independence that she'd kept most people at arm's length since arriving in the territory. "Will you tell me about your ranch?" she asked, changing the subject. I've heard it's quite impressive. Dane laughed, the sound warming her more than the fire. It's nothing grand yet, but it's growing. Started with 40 acres and a dream 5 years ago. Now it's up to 300 acres with a decent herd. That's remarkable, Madeline said sincerely. You must have worked incredibly hard. Every day, he nodded. Same as you with this place. I've seen how you've transformed it from bare land to a proper homestead. Surprise flashed across Madeline's face. You've been watching my progress. Hard not to notice determination like yours, Dane replied, meeting her gaze directly. Most folks who come out here looking for a new start don't last 6 months. You've outlasted plenty. The compliment pleased her more than it should have. Well, now I'm back to square one, she sighed, looking toward the exposed interior of her cabin. Not quite, Dane countered. You've still got the walls, the foundation, your determination, and, he paused, neighbors willing to help. As the night deepened around them, they talked of their pasts. Dane's childhood in Texas, his time driving cattle north after the war, and his dream of building something lasting. Madeline shared stories of her family back east, her desire to teach, and how the frontier had challenged and changed her. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they lay side by side beneath the shelter, a respectable distance between them, looking up at the stars through the gaps in the canvas. Thank you, Madeline whispered into the darkness. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. You'd have figured something out, Dane replied, his voice low and certain, but I'm glad I was here all the same. Morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. Madeline awoke to find Dane already up, cooking breakfast over a fresh fire and making a list of materials needed to rebuild her roof. I've been thinking, he said, handing her a plate of beans and biscuits. I've got extra timber at my place from when I built the barn. With some help from my hands, we could have your roof back on in a few days. I can't accept that, Madeline protested. It's too much. Consider it a loan, Dane suggested. You can help with the spring cattle drive. I need someone good with figures to keep track of the herd count and supplies. Madeline narrowed her eyes suspiciously. And you think I'm good with figures based on what exactly? Saw the ledger in your cabin, Dane admitted. Every penny accounted for, neat as can be. That's worth something on a drive. You want a school teacher on a cattle drive? She asked incredulously. Dane shrugged. I want someone smart who doesn't waste words or resources. The fact that you can read and write better than most of my crew is just a bonus. Against her better judgment, Madeline found herself agreeing. By midday, 3 of Dane's ranch hands had arrived with a wagon full of timber, tools, and supplies. They worked through the day, securing the walls and framing a new roof structure. Madeline worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a bandana. She caught Dane watching her several times throughout the day, his expression unreadable but intense. Each time their eyes met, she felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she attributed to gratitude and exhaustion. As the sun began to set, the basic framework was in place, but the roof would need another full day of work. The ranch hands departed, but Dane remained. You don't need to stay another night, Madeline said as they cleaned up the worksite. I'll be fine under our little shelter. Our shelter needs reinforcing after last night's rain, Dane replied matter-of-factly. Besides, I promised to see this through. That night, their conversation flowed more easily. Dane told her about his parents, his father a Texas Ranger, his mother a schoolteacher not unlike herself, both lost to fever when he was 16. Madeline shared how her father had opposed her coming west, predicting she'd be back within a month. He still writes asking when I'll admit he was right and come home, she said with a rueful smile. And will you? Go back east, I mean, Dane asked, his voice carefully neutral. Madeline looked around at the half-rebuilt roof, the temporary shelter, and finally at the man across from her. "No," she said with certainty. "This is home now. It's not always easy, but it's mine." Something shifted in Dane's expression, approval perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Good," he said simply. "The territory needs people who stick." 4 days later, the roof was complete. Madeline stood in the center of her cabin, looking up at the fresh pine beams and tight cedar shingles. It was better than before, sturdier and more carefully crafted. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she said to Dane as they stood in her doorway. "The cattle drive leaves in 2 weeks," he reminded her. "I'll hold you to your promise." "I'll be there," she assured him, extending her hand formally. "A deal's a deal." Instead of shaking her hand, Dane surprised her by taking it gently and turning it palm up. A large blister had formed where she'd gripped the hammer too tightly. "You should wrap this," he said, his calloused thumb brushing over it lightly. Madeline pulled her hand back, flustered by the contact and his concern. "It's nothing. I've had worse from chopping wood." Dane nodded, replacing his hat. "I'll send word about the drive details." He mounted his horse with the same fluid grace she'd noticed that first night, tipping his hat to her before riding away. Madeline watched until he disappeared down the road, puzzled by the emptiness she suddenly felt. She'd been alone for years, preferred it even, so why did her cabin feel so quiet now? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Madeline arranged for a neighbor to check on her property, packed appropriate clothing, and read everything she could find about cattle drives. When Dane arrived to collect her, she was ready, though visibly nervous. "Having second thoughts?" he asked as they rode toward his ranch. "No," she said firmly. "Just wondering if I've lost my mind." Dane's laugh echoed across the open plains. "Most sensible question I've heard all day." The Xavier Ranch was impressive, a large main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals spread across a verdant valley with a clear stream running through it. Nearly 2,000 head of cattle grazed in the distance, with cowboys already beginning to move them toward the gathering point. That evening, Dane introduced her to the crew, 15 men of various ages and backgrounds who regarded her with curiosity and some skepticism. She met his foreman, an older man named Hank Mitchell, who seemed to size her up with one glance. "She'll be handling the books and inventory," Dane explained. "Treat her with the same respect you'd show me." "Yes, boss," Hank nodded, then turned to Madeline. "Hope you're ready for a long, dusty month, Miss Zane." "I believe I am, Mr. Mitchell," she replied confidently, though her stomach twisted with doubt. That night, sitting on the porch of Dane's house, away from the revelry of the cowboys, Madeline voiced her concerns. "They think I'll be a burden," she said quietly. "They think you're different," Dane corrected. "They'll judge you on what you do, not what they expect you to do." "Is that how you judge people?" she asked. Dane considered this, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I try to. Though I admit I had certain expectations about you when we first met." "Oh," Madeline raised an eyebrow. "And what were those?" "Thought you'd be gone within a year," he admitted. "Eastern lady playing at frontier life until it got too hard." And now his eyes met hers, clear and direct. "Now I know better. You've got grit, Madeline Zane, more than most men I know." The cattle drive began at dawn the next day. Madeline rode alongside the chuck wagon, keeping careful count of the herd at river crossings and helping the cook, a grizzled man named Wilson, prepare meals when they stopped. The work was harder than she'd imagined, dusty, exhausting, and relentless. But she found an unexpected pleasure in the rhythm of the days, the openness of the sky, and the camaraderie that slowly developed among the crew. Dane rode back and forth along the line, overseeing everything, solving problems before they became disasters. He checked on her often, bringing her water when the day grew hot, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of previous drives. 10 days in, disaster struck. A sudden storm spooked the herd, causing a stampede that scattered cattle across miles of rough country. In the chaos, one of the younger cowboys was thrown from his horse and trampled. Madeline helped Wilson tend to his injuries, setting a broken arm and stitching a deep gash on his forehead with steady hands. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Dane asked later, as they sat by the fire. The rest of the crew finally settled after the long day of rounding up scattered cattle. "My father was a doctor," Madeline explained. "He insisted all his children learn basic medical care, said it was the one skill that would always be needed." "He was right about that," Dane said, admiration clear in his voice. "You saved Thomas a lot of pain and probably his arm today." "It was nothing special," she demurred. "It was to him," Dane insisted. "And to me." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of how they'd misjudged each other initially, or of how much had changed in the short time since the tornado. As the drive continued north toward Kansas, Madeline found herself increasingly drawn to Dane. It wasn't just his leadership or the respect he commanded from his men. It was the quiet moments, how he sat with injured cattle rather than shooting them immediately, how he knew each of his men's stories and families, how he would sometimes recite poetry under his breath when he thought no one was listening. One evening, nearly 3 weeks into the drive, Dane invited her to ride ahead with him to scout the next day's route. They traveled several miles in companionable silence, eventually stopping atop a ridge overlooking a winding river valley. "It's beautiful," Madeline breathed, taking in the vista. "This is why I stay," Dane said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "Not just for the land or the cattle, for moments like this when you can see forever." They stood close together, shoulders almost touching. Madeline was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid and reassuring. "I used to wonder what I was looking for out here," she confessed. "When I first came west, I told everyone it was independence, opportunity, but sometimes I think it was this sense of possibility." Dane turned to look at her, his expression open and unguarded. "And have you found it? What you were looking for?" "I'm beginning to think so," she replied softly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Dane reached out, his fingertips just brushing hers. "Madeline," he began, his voice rough with emotion, but a shout from behind interrupted them. Hank was riding hard toward them, waving urgently. "Boss, rustlers hit the south end of the herd. They've taken about 100 head." The tender moment shattered as they raced back to camp. The next 2 days were a blur of pursuit, confrontation, and eventually recovery of most of the stolen cattle. In the skirmish with the rustlers, Dane took a bullet to the shoulder, not life-threatening, but serious enough to require Madeline's medical attention. She worked methodically in his tent, extracting the bullet and cleaning the wound while he watched her through pain-glazed eyes. "You're good at this," he mumbled as she bandaged his shoulder. "Hush," she scolded gently. "Save your strength." "Need to tell you something," he insisted, catching her wrist with surprising strength. "In case something happens, nothing's going to happen," Madeline interrupted firmly. "This wound will heal clean if you rest and don't do anything foolish." "Madeline," he said, his voice clearer now, "I've been watching you since you first staked your claim. Not just your land, the way you face every challenge head-on, the way you've made a life here against all odds." Madeline's hand stilled on the bandage. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because nearly getting shot makes a man realize time isn't guaranteed," he replied simply. And I don't want to waste any more of it pretending I'm not falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them. Madeline felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Dane said, his gaze steady despite his pain. "I know you're brave and stubborn and kind. I know you care more about others than yourself. I know that when that tornado took your roof, you were more worried about your books getting wet than yourself getting shelter." A small laugh escaped her. "That's not entirely true." "It is," he insisted. "And I know that every day on this drive I've found another reason to admire you." Madeline sat back, overwhelmed by his words and the feelings they stirred in her. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Dane assured her. "Just think about it. Think about what happens after we reach Kansas." The remainder of the drive passed with a new awareness between them. Dane recovered quickly, though Madeline insisted he take it easier than he wanted to. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, often lasting long into the night after the rest of the camp had fallen asleep. Madeline found herself sharing dreams she'd never voiced aloud of starting a school, of building something lasting in the territory, of finding someone who understood the pull of this wild land as she did. Dane spoke of his hopes for his ranch, his desire to bring civilization without taming the spirit of the frontier, his loneliness despite being surrounded by good men. When they finally reached the railhead in Dodge City, the cattle were sold for an excellent price. Dane paid his men, including Madeline, who protested that he'd already compensated her with the roof. "A deal's a deal," he echoed her earlier words, pressing the money into her hand. "You earned this fair and square." That evening, while the Cowboys celebrated in town, Dane took Madeline to dinner at the finest restaurant in Dodge City. She wore the one dress she'd packed, a simple blue calico that suddenly felt inadequate for the occasion. "You look beautiful," Dane told her sincerely as he pulled out her chair. "I look like what I am, a woman who's been on a cattle drive for a month," she laughed. "Exactly," he smiled. "And that's beautiful to me." They talked about the journey home, which would begin the following day. Madeline felt a strange reluctance to return, knowing that their daily companionship would end. "What will you do when we get back?" Dane asked over dessert. "Return to my cabin, I suppose," she said. "Plant a garden if it's not too late in the season. Maybe start planning that school I mentioned." Dane nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I have a proposition for you, Madeline." "Another business arrangement," she teased lightly. "Not exactly," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I want you to consider marrying me." Madeline's breath caught. Despite their growing closeness, she hadn't expected this. "Dane, I know it's sudden," he continued. "And I know you value your independence. I'm not asking you to give that up. Your land would still be yours. The school would be yours to build. But we could face whatever comes next together." "Why me?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You could have any woman in the territory." Dane's expression softened. "Because when that tornado took your roof away and I said we'd sleep under the stars instead, you didn't just accept help, you became my partner in solving the problem. Because every day since then, I've seen how we balance each other. You plan, I act. You think, I feel. You question, I affirm." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Dane acknowledged. "Marriage never is, but I think it could be good, really good." Madeline looked at the man across from her, strong, honorable, unexpectedly thoughtful, and realized that somewhere between the tornado and now, she had indeed fallen in love with him. "Yes," she said softly, then more confidently. "Yes, I'll marry you, Dane Xavier." His face broke into a wide smile that transformed his usually serious features. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she nodded, squeezing his hand. "But I have conditions." Name them, he said immediately. I keep teaching. I keep my land. And we visit Pennsylvania at least once so my father can meet the man who proved him wrong about the West. Dane laughed, bringing her hand to his lips. Done, done, and gladly done. They were married 2 days after returning to Clearwater Springs, in a simple ceremony attended by Dane's ranch hands and a few of Madeline's neighbors. They divided their time between her homestead and his ranch, eventually building a new house halfway between the two properties. The following spring, Madeline opened a school in town, teaching the children of settlers and ranch hands alike. Dane expanded his herd and reputation, becoming known as one of the fairest and most successful ranchers in the territory. 5 years after the tornado that had brought them together, they sat on the porch of their home, watching their 3-year-old son chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Madeline, cradling their infant daughter, leaned against her husband's shoulder. "You ever think about that night?" she asked. "When the storm took my roof?" "Often," Dane admitted, his arm tightening around her. "Best tornado that ever hit Oklahoma territory as far as I'm concerned." "That's a terrible thing to say," Madeline laughed. "It destroyed half my possessions." "But it gave you me," he countered with a smile. "And me you." Madeline couldn't argue with that logic. "I suppose sometimes you have to lose a roof to find a home," she mused. Dane kissed her temple gently. "And sometimes you have to sleep under the stars to see what's been right in front of you all along." As night fell around them, stars appearing one by one in the vast Oklahoma sky, Madeline reflected on how a moment of destruction had led to a lifetime of building something far more precious than any roof or wall. Together, they had created a home that no tornado could ever take away.